Butler Yeats, one of the most important poets of the first half of the 20th century. His poems are so idyllic and idealistic on one side, and so full of blood and sweat and dust and tears on the other side. Let's see together what I'm talking about. Welcome back to my channel at Maiora. So today we're going to talk about one of the most requested authors here on my channel, and he is William Butler Yeats. Yeats is considered, and rightly so, one of the most representative poets of the first half of the 20th century, together with Eliot, Thomas Sterne Eliot. And well, there are many reasons. His poetry certainly belongs to his era, to modernism. It's also linked to tradition, but at the same time, it is also, we can say, an instrument to interpret reality at his time, a very strong and dramatic reality, the reality of his motherland, of his country, of his land, which is Ireland. I made a video, a short video. It's a sort of a historical note here. It's on this playlist, talking about the situation in Ireland during the 19th and 20th century, just in order to explain a few main events and to let you know why it was so meaningful at the time to be Irish. Okay, we have a lot, there are a lot of Irish authors like Joyce, for example, like Wilde, for example, like Yates in this case, and they absolutely had to face this reality and react, and mostly they reacted in the most different ways. Okay, on one side, Joyce, he loved his country, totally loved his country. You know, he wrote Dubliners, and his culture, his city was always in his heart, but at the same time he embraced the idea of modernism, of a main character which actually represents a man who isn't a man of action, the anti-hero, detached from reality, okay, somehow. And so this was one kind of a response. Oscar Wilde, on the other side, he embraced the Victorian society, and then he regretted that. If you remember the Profundis, the passage we have read together, and he said that he had relied on the Victorian age too much. But anyway, he his life was totally detached from Ireland, and also aestheticism was obviously a response to life that was totally idealistic. Yates, well, his answer, his attitude is completely different, because he belonged to his land and he made everything he could to give support and as to be also a witness, okay, of what was actually happening in this span of time in which so much happened. Okay, so if you don't remember or if you don't know, please go back and check out my video about that. It's short, it's not a large historical essay or something, just a few main events to understand how Ireland was suffering from exploitation, British exploitation, famine, and hunger, and immigration, and how they fought for the home rule for Ireland, and it failed, and there was another insurrection. So there were many events that were impossible to somehow to to avoid, okay, if you were if you loved your country, as Yeats certainly did. So first of all, as I said before, he was born in Dublin. The year was 1865, and his father was a painter. So he was the son of an artist, basically. In fact, he he studied at the Dublin School of Arts, but then he gave up for literature, obviously. Very soon he joined the Irish Nationalist Movement. And again, here it's important to know that this nationalist movement wanted independence for Ireland, basically. He was very proud of his culture, of Irish culture. He strongly believed that expressing and somehow representing that culture could offer the ideal of a free nation. In fact, in this period, there was a sort of a known political movement that developed, in these years, and it was called Anglo-Irish Revival. They actually believed that there were intellectual needs that Ireland had, and those needs were as important, or almost as important, as political actions or other kind of actions. They were intellectual needs, and so they absolutely wanted to preserve their nationality, their legends, their folklore, history, and all that. And so all this, I can say that this cultural element was almost as important as a political action, because it was important to be independent as far as culture was concerned, as far as identity was concerned. And a country could be free only if that country had its own identity, of course. And so it was also important to maintain independence from the English culture that was obviously in this case prevailing. They basically invented a new hero, because the traditional epic heroes were used to somehow for the home rule for Ireland propaganda. And we know that the home rule failed, and those heroes failed along with it. And so the idea was to create a new hero, and this new hero was were meant to represent new ideals and a more positive and you can say optimistic view, of the future. And the name of this hero was Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn. I will spell it for you. The spelling is Cuchulainn. Okay, it's a strange spelling, that's why I wanted to spell it for you. Okay, the pronunciation is Cuchulainn, and yes, he belonged to this sort of a new legend that was about the ideal of Ireland as a poor lady, as a poor woman that was supposed to become queen when men become or are as chivalrous as our Cuchulainn, and so every single man is somehow invited to be chivalric and to behave as Cuchulainn wood, in order to somehow give Ireland, give this poor old lady, her crown back. Well, the engagement, Yeats' engagement for Ireland was certainly not just theoretic or intellectual. He also founded the Irish National Society, that was in 1890. In the 1890s, we can say. And he founded the Irish Theatre Society in 1903. And the base of this Irish Theatre Society was actually the Abbey Theatre, founded in 1904, so just 1 year later. The Abbey Theatre, which became actually focal point for Irish Renaissance, okay, cultural Renaissance, as far as theatre was concerned, and ideals, and so on and so forth. The early poetry, Yeats' early poetry, was certainly influenced by tradition, ideals, legends, but also by a very real love, because he actually fell in love for a revolutionary woman whose name was Maud Gonne. And so certainly this relationship and his love for her influenced his works and his poems a lot. And from a very literary point of view, he was also influenced by aestheticism. I have mentioned aestheticism before because I've mentioned Wilde, so another Irishman, and obviously this was a very, very important movement at the time, okay, totally idealistic somehow. As I said before, Yeats was also a man of action somehow, and he for 6 years, between 1922 and 1928, he was senator in the Parliament of the Irish Free State. And the Irish Free State, okay, was the result of a treaty before the Republic of Ireland was actually established. So again, if you have any doubts, you can always go back to this very short video and you have all details about that. In 1923, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, of course, and then he died. And when he died in 1939, he wasn't in Ireland, he wasn't in England, he was in France. As I said before, together with Eliot, Thomas Sterne Eliot, he is considered the major poet of the first half of the 20th century. This is the period of modernism. We have talked a lot about that in my video about modernism, of course. And yes, we can say that both of them definitely belonged to modernism, this new perspective of literature, this new perspective of communication, this new perspective of subjectivity. But on one side, Eliot, he developed these new techniques like the objective correlative and the subjective description, okay, of the object, and that was quite universal in some way. On the other side, Yeats, he of course he did share this techniques, ideals of modernism, but at the same time we can find very indigenous and very local elements that were absolutely, that belonged to his country, to Ireland and to England. Okay, this is something that didn't belong to Eliot too much, but it certainly belonged to him. I've mentioned before the fact that his early poetry was definitely influenced by Romantic tradition. So the love for nature, and in particular Irish landscapes, of course, and legends. There are many poems, okay, we can refer to. One of them can be the Lake Isle of Innisfree, from the Rose. It was written in 1893. And it's a sort of a dream to escape to a simple, very idyllic life, and this idyllic life is obviously represented by this island that is a legendary island that belongs to the Irish lore, basically. But everything changed when the second phase of his poetry was developed. In fact, he totally changed his style and his content due to his interest and engagement in the political situation, we can say so. I've mentioned before his work, Easter 1916, which is about Eastern Rising. Easter Rising is obviously this insurrection that happened in Ireland and unfortunately was a total failure and led to the execution of the leaders. In this case, there is a shift from the legendary island to a very contemporary and real, and not just realistic, but real Ireland. And he expresses through poetry the weight and complexity of events, which is extremely strong and interesting. Because poetry, as I always say, is an incredible instrument, is an incredible tool to express any kind of matters, not just idyllic matters, not just love themes or romantic themes or whatever, but it's also an incredibly powerful way of communication, okay? And this is exactly what he did here. He used poetry as an incredible weapon, okay, of communication. And in this poem, at first, at the very beginning, he absolutely didn't hide the fact that this uprising took him totally by surprise. And then in the second part, he talks about the fact that he didn't expect those people to be revolutionaries or to be the leaders of this revolution, this somehow insurrection, we can say so. Because the leaders were, we can say, above suspicion. They were normal people. They were never considered as part of political circles or environments. So it was something that was basically created underground, and people who were considered very normal people and went totally unnoticed, were actually somehow creating and developing this incredible and powerful reaction. And this is the line he uses again and again. A terrible beauty is born. A terrible beauty that is the violent, somehow it's terrible, this violent reaction towards tyranny. So that's the point, basically. Then there's a third part in which we can find a symbol, and this symbol is very interesting because he talks about a stone, and this stone is a symbol of a certainty of purpose. Somehow, okay, a certainty of purpose, of a goal, of a name, something that is absolutely that can be changed somehow. And finally, there's a last part in which he it's full of empathy somehow, and he wonders what will be necessary to change things, and of course he feels for those who have died. And I read his lines. He say, "Oh, when made suffice. Okay, so when would it be enough? We know their dream enough to know they dreamed and are dead. So we know their dream, so their dream was a dream of freedom, of independence, and what we know is that they dreamed and now they are dead. So it's definitely quite dramatic. Obviously, the style he uses here is completely different from the style he had used in the first part, okay, of his works or his career. The style, the language is less ornate, less elegant, maybe less artificial somehow. It's more vigorous and real and powerful. He wrote a letter to his father, and in this letter he openly explained the kind of style and the kind of language he wanted to use. I will read a few lines for you to understand. He said, "I have tried to make my work convincing with a speech so natural and dramatic that a hearer would feel the presence of a man thinking and feeling." This is extremely interesting. So basically what he says is that he wanted his speech, so his words, his language, to be natural and dramatic. So natural on one side, so the language everyone would use, not artificial, nothing too complex, quite direct. And dramatic because it is heartfelt somehow. Okay, so obviously it's quite tragic and it has to be very vigorous and very powerful on one side. So the hearer, he talks about the hearer, doesn't talk about the reader. As if the audience was made of people who listened to him instead of reading his poems. So he is actually considering his poems here as a speech, so a direct, a very real face-to-face communication, okay, with someone who's listening to what I'm saying. And these people, these hearers, should perceive that the person, okay, talking, so Yeats himself, of course, must be a thinking and feeling man. So his brain, okay, his thought is important, okay, his reason on one side, and his feeling. So they have to perceive the fact that he believes in what he says, which is extremely important, obviously, when we listen to someone. And it's quite an epitome of his genuinity somehow. The last part of his poetry is completely different because actually we can say that he changes his style again, and it's not that direct anymore. It's much more appreciated in academic circles because it's more difficult to understand somehow. We can say that the keywords here are compression and sort of a personal philosophy, and a very complex symbolism that is quite difficult to grasp, okay, if it isn't analyzed from a very academic point of view. Let's remember that when we talk about Yeats, obviously, first of all, we talk about Yeats the poet. And there are a lot of poems I could actually quote here, or I could name a variety of titles. I've mentioned The Rose before. I could mention Michael Robertus and The Dancer, which is okay, Easter 1916 was taken. There are others like The Tower, The Green Helmet, there are many more. But actually he didn't write just poetry, he wrote drama. I've mentioned the theater before, like for example in the work The Land of Heart's Desire. He wrote fiction, like for example the Irish fairy tales, which is very typical and very very, very obvious because of his love for the Irish tradition and legends and so on and so forth, and also the Celtic twilight, okay, that goes back obviously to the Celtic legends and tradition and folklore and all that. And also something non-fictional, like the letters, for example. I've mentioned a letter to the father a few moments ago, and we wrote a few lines, and autobiographies as well. Well, that's Yeats. Okay, that and so much more. What is great is that reading Yeats, we can certainly perceive and appreciate the academic and the incredibly artistic value of his works. But at the same time, we can also perceive, as I said before, the blood, the dust, the tears of a witness that was there and used somehow poetry, not as a final result, not as a final goal, but as an instrument to get to something more, which is an ideal probably, or a way to witness something, or a way to express something that actually belonged to his time, to his country. And this is very precious for us, okay, to go back and read and perceive through his works the spirit and the feeling and the sounds and the smells of his era and his amazing land. So I hope that my video here was quite interesting for you and effective, okay, in order to give you a sort of a summary of what Yeats was. But we can eventually read a poem together if you want it, if you want me to, or whatever you want. Just let me know, okay, if you liked it. Thank you so very much for supporting my channel. Thank you so very much for everything you do. Thank you so very much for those of you who give me a little support and contribution on PayPal. I remind you the address, which is Maiora, the name of the channel, @maioratutor@gmail.com. Okay, you find obviously the address in the description below, and you find the button, PayPal button, on the homepage of the channel. So thank you so very much for those of you who support my activity, and you are my satisfaction. Okay, so thank you so very much for being there. See you very soon with English literature, British literature, Irish literature, and not only, of course. Bye.